Welcome to Chapter 27 of To Kill a Mockingbird. Things did settle down after fashion, as Atticus said they would. By the middle of October, only two small things out of the ordinary happened to two make-home citizens. No, there were three things, and they did not directly concern us, the Finches, but in a way, they did. Why, welcome, Mr. Luke Sweeney.
How you doing, Miss Faye?
Excellent. You want to take
That's great.
over?
Yes, where are we?
The first thing.
The first thing that Mr. Bob Ewell acquired and lost a job in a matter of days and probably made himself unique in the annals
Yeah.
of the 1913s. He was the only man I ever heard of who was fired from the WPA laziness. I suppose his brief burst of fame brought on a briefer burst of industry. But his job lasted only as long as his notoriety. Mr. Ewell found himself as forgotten as Tom Robinson. Thereafter, he resumed his regular weekly appearances at the welfare office for his check, and received with no grace, amid obscure mutterings, that the bastards who thought they ran this town wouldn't permit an honest man to make a living. Jones, the welfare lady, said Mr. Ewell openly accused Atticus of getting his job. She was upset enough to walk down to Atticus's office and tell him about it. Atticus told Miss Ruth not to fret, that if Bob Ewell wanted to discuss Atticus's getting his job, he knew the way to the office.
The second thing happened to Judge Taylor. Judge Taylor was not a Sunday night churchgoer. Mrs. Taylor was. Judge Taylor savored his Sunday night hour alone in his big house, and church time found him holed up in his study reading the writings of Bob Taylor. No kin, but the judge would have been proud to claim it. One Sunday night, lost in fruity metaphors and florid diction, Judge Taylor's attention was wrenched from the page by an irritating scratching noise. "Hush!" he said to Ann Taylor, his fat, nondescript dog. Then he realized he was speaking to an empty room. The scratching noise was coming from the rear of the house. Judge Taylor clumped to the back porch to let Ann out and found the screen door swinging open. A shadow on the corner of the house caught his eye, and that was all he saw of his visitor. Mrs. Taylor came home from church to find her husband in his chair, lost in the writings of Bob Taylor, with a shotgun across his lap.
The third thing happened to Ellen Robertson. Tom's window. If Mr. Ewell had forgotten as Tom Robinson was forgotten as Boo Radley. But Tom was not forgotten by his employer, Mr. Link Dees. Mr. Link Dees made a job for Helen. He didn't really need her, but he said he felt right back about the way things turned out. I knew who took care of her children while Helen was away. Calpurnia said it was hard on Ellen, because he had to walk nearly a mile out of her way to avoid the Ewells, who, according to Ellen, chunked at her.
I think that they spit at her, possibly. Like,
I agree.
Gross.
That is gross. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
First time she tried to use the public road, Mr. Link Dees eventually received the impression that Ellen was coming to work each morning from the wrong direction, and dragged the reason out of her. "Just let me be, Mr. Link, please, sir." Ellen begged. "The hell that I will, Mr. Link."
I don't like him.
I don't
He's
either.
too mean.
He's very.
Poor Helen.
Yeah, I feel bad for her.
Me too.
Said Mr. Link. He told her to come by his store that afternoon.
That's okay.
Afternoon before she left. She did. Mr. Link closed the store, but put his hat firmly on his head, and walked Ellen home. He He walked her to the short way by the Yules. On his way back, Mr. Link stopped at the crazy gate.
Yule! He
He
called.
called.
I say Yule!
The windows normally packed with children were empty.
I know every last one of you's in there laying on the floor. Now hear me, Bob Yule. If I hear one more peep out of my girl Helen about not being able to walk this road, I'll have you in jail before sundown. Mr. Link spat in the dust and walked home. Helen went to work next morning and used the public road. Nobody chunked at her. But when she was a few yards beyond the Yule house, she looked around and saw Mr. Yule walking behind her. She turned and walked on, and Mr. Yule kept the same distance behind her until she reached Mr. Link Diaz's house. All the way to the house, Helen said, she heard a soft voice behind her, crooning foul words. Ugh. Thoroughly frightened, she telephoned Mr. Link at the store, which was not too far from his house. As Mr. Link came out of his store, he saw Mr. Yule leaning on the fence. Mr. Yule said, "Don't you look at me, Link Diaz, like I was dirt. I ain't jumped your..."
First thing you can do, Yule, is get your stinking carcass off my property. You're leaning on it, and I can afford fresh paint for it. Second thing you can do is stay away from my cook. I'll have you up for assault.
I ain't touched her, Link Diaz, and ain't about to go with no Negro.
You don't have to touch her. All you have to do is make her afraid. Ain't if assault ain't enough to keep you locked up a while. I'll get you on the ladies' law, so get out of my sight. If you don't think I mean it, just bother that girl again.
Mr. Yule evidently thought he meant it, for Helen reported no further trouble. "I don't like it, Atticus, I don't like it at all," was Aunt Alexandra's assessment of these events. "That man seems to have a permanent running grudge against everybody connected with that case. I know how that kind of paying off grudges, but I don't understand why he should harbor one. He had his way in court, didn't he?" "I think I understand," said Atticus. "It might be because he knows in his heart that very few people in Maycomb really believed his and Mayella's yarns. He thought he'd be a hero, but all he got for his pain was, okay, we'll convict this Negro, but get back to your dump. He's had his fling with about everybody now, so he ought to be satisfied. He'll settle down when the weather changes."